Alright, so update 6 is finally here, and here's everything you need to know. The biggest addition to this pre-release is definitely the new block palettes preset system. You can now save and reuse your favorite block palettes, which is honestly going to make building so much easier. There's a brand new side tab inside the quick settings menu where you can manage all your palettes, save presets, and load them back whenever you want. There's also a new full palette editor. You can create, save, delete, and restore palettes, and there's even a color picker and a block eyedropper tool for selecting colors directly from blocks in the world. Grass will no longer spread underwater. And if you already had underwater grass laid somewhere, it will now slowly turn back into dirt over time. Server discovery got updated too. Servers with too many tags will now show only the first 3 tags with an overflow indicator, and hovering over it shows the rest in a tooltip. Item dropped into the creative library will now always get deleted, even in empty slots, and you can now right-click to drop items one at a time from a stack. Trash piles now have new break sounds. Braziers have unique break sounds depending on their material type, and breaking an unlit brazier no longer plays the torch flare sound. Leaves and brambles also receive completely new sounds for breaking and walking on them. While cloth blocks now have better landing sounds and adjusted walking volume. One of the biggest thing is that they removed something called template_aggressive_zombies. That's basically the old combat behavior system for zombies, which is now fully replaced with something called template_predator. And what that means is actually that zombies are no longer just normal enemies. This new predator behavior is a little bit more dynamic. It's meant to make hostile NPCs behave less like basic AI and more like actual hunters, let's say that. NPCs can now spawn with multiple entities effects active at the same time. So, instead of an NPC being like, this one has poison, or this one has speed, you can now get combinations. So it's gonna be a little bit tricky, as you might fight something that's fast, or has poison attacks, or can regenerate. That sounds pretty fun, not gonna lie. They also added new death visual effects for NPCs, so that's also pretty fun, and it gives the game quite a bit of character. Another new template is template_flying_aggressive, which is basically a new framework for flying hostile enemies that can do ranged attacks. This is a bit important because it replaces a bunch of older systems, such as template_I, template_spirit, and template_seeker. So basically, they are cleaning up the old enemy systems with more flexible systems. So basically, they just remade the flying system to be more advanced. They added something called Graph System for World Gen V2. This is still in development, but it's basically a way to structure how terrain and world features are generated using graph-based logic. It sounds a bit technical, and that's because it actually is. But in simple terms, world generation is getting more modular and controllable. So instead of hard-coded terrain rules, they're moving towards systems where generation is built from interconnected logic nodes. So this is why they added some new tools such as white noise density, transparent material provider, directional jitter, and vector offset positions. And also a new set of vector providers: adder, cross, multiplier, normalizer, random, and more. So basically, they're expanding how vectors can be manipulated for World Gen. It sounds kinda huge for devs, but I'm not really sure, because I'm not a nerd. Oh, and there's also an explosive block component now. So certain blocks can now be designed with built-in explosive behavior, and will be definitely used in the future for new features, which is a bit exciting. they added a very interesting addition, which is wilderness tracking system. This one is actually pretty cool because it basically tracks where your home is or where the wilderness begins based on where your bed locations are. And now for some modding and creative tools. First of all, projectiles can now have their spawn position rotate depending on the firing entity. So basically, if you're firing a projectile from a moving or rotating character, the spawn behavior can now align properly. They also improved soft collision systems, basically how entities bump into each other, so it takes hitboxes into account. And they also added a Texture Atlas API, which now respects item model overrides in previews, which is just a fancy way of saying what you see in the editor can now actually match what you see in-game. There's been a little bit of an audio rework. They've completely reworked the audio bus and ducking system, so when multiple sounds play at once, the game now better decides which sound should quiet down so things don't turn into chaos. They've also added some new ambient and interaction sounds. Walking and landing on sticks now has proper audio. Treasure blocks have new break sounds. Cactus blocks got a full sound set for walking, landing, hitting, and braking. Scaraks have received a couple of buffs. They can no longer be damaged by environmental hazards such as brambles, and they've also become completely immune to poison. Tame moss horns have developed a taste for the feedback and will be attracted to it. Sleeping has received a small but welcome quality of life improvement. Previously, after sleeping through the night, you would remain in bed. Now, in the morning, your character automatically leaves the bed. Arid palm leaves and giant palm leaves now drop between 1 to 5 palm tree logs when broken. Eternal corn crops now yield twice as much corn. Mushroom blocks will now play distinct sounds when they are walked upon. Damaged, broken, or landed on. Crystal and gem blocks will now play distinct sounds when they are walked upon, damaged, broken, or landed on. Walking and landing on glass blocks will now play distinct sounds. The Quebec plushie will now play distinct sounds when it's hit. Don't do it, by the way. Broken or interacted with. The environment category in the quick settings menu has been renamed to personal environment to make clearer that these are your own client settings and separate from the world settings. They also fixed a bunch of bugs such as players' animations sometimes not playing during voice chat, NPCs that charge should no longer stop abruptly when blocks are placed, and tamed animals should no longer unexpectedly despawn when there are a lot of the same animal type in the area. They added a new color tool to creative mode. The new color tool can be found in the specialized tool sections within the creative inventory and has 3 modes to select from. Coloring mode allows you to replace blocks you are aiming at with another and can preserve shape variants while doing so. Gradient mode allows you to paint smooth color transitions across an area. And shading mode applies lighter and darker tones based on a chosen light source, surface angle, or a custom palette. The trigger volume tool got some massive changes. A single volume can now hold multiple independent rule sets on the same event. Group conditions an effect by having them share an entry number together. They added 2 new event types for it. One block used fires when a player interacts with a usable block such as a door, lever, or chest, and on entity died fires when an entity within the volume dies. They also added 2 new conditions. Block used allows you to filter by things such as block type or state. Entity count counts the number of living NPCs inside a volume. This, combined with the on entity died, can be used to quickly create encounters that requires all enemies to be defeated to progress. They also added 2 new effects. Spawn NPC allows you to spawn 1 or more NPCs. Play animation allows you to make the triggering entity or all entities within the volume perform an animation. They adjusted 3 conditions. Item condition now has additional options such as comparison operator, empty inventory toggle, and can now specify metadata keys or values. Block type condition now has additional options regarding block rotation. Tag condition now doesn't have tag options to invert the check performed. 8 effects also got adjusted. Send message now has a recipient option, allowing others to receive the triggered message. Send message and show event title text can now include the volume tag's value by writing the text key in braces, such as parentheses, my key parentheses. Play sound now has a location option and will default to the volume center rather than the triggering entity. Run root interaction now has an equip slot field for using the equipped interaction type. Place block and replace block type now have additional options regarding block rotation. Teleport now has a relative to volume option. Modify tags now has an append operation. They added 4 new commands. /trigger volume tag set can set the volume tag from the chat interface. /trigger volume tag remove can remove a volume tags from the chat interface. /trigger volume TP can teleport the player to a volume. This can now also be performed via the trigger volumes UI. And of course, /trigger volume rename can rename a trigger volume. This can now also be performed via the trigger volumes UI. Delayed and projectile trigger effects will now fire at the correct location even after the projectiles despawn. Exit effects will now also run when an entity despawns or is removed, in addition to leaving the volume. Resetting weather with a trigger volume will no longer briefly cause the sky to turn black. Saving trigger volume presets will no longer corrupt your asset.zip. The server discovery screen can now be navigated with a controller. The use legacy network stack option has been removed from the settings. And of course, they fixed a bunch of bugs, such as an issue where suppressing some specific NPCs from spawning could also incorrectly cause other unrelated NPCs to spawn. New mage towers have been added. You'll find the new towers in multiple areas such as Sandstone, Shale, and volcanic biomes. A new green build light source has been added to creative inventory for builders to use. You can now hold a torch in your offhand while carrying any type of seed. All types of gravel and their half-block variants can now be crafted at the farming bench. The base gravel block now specifically requires stone rubble rather than any rubble. Shell gravel now specifically requires shell rubble rather than any rubble. Marble gravel now specifically requires marble rubble rather than any rubble. There is a brand new tool for creative mode called a point tool. This tool allows you to place points that can be named, given tags, and teleported to. Points persist within the world, may be copied into prefabs, and come with their own point inspector UI panel. There's been a lot of performance improvements in this pre-release. World generation is now considerably faster. Portals to the Dragonspire world should now take less time to appear. World generation now uses fewer cores on Apple Silicon Max to improve frame rate. The maximum number of chunks that can be loaded each frame has been increased. Joining a friend's hosted world will now generally connect much faster. Joining a server now has more time to complete its connection. This should result in more successful connections for those with slower or less stable connections. So there's been some changes to the trigger volume tool. First of all, they added a new volume create trigger that will trigger an effect when a new volume is created within the existing volume. They added a new always active option that can be used to persistently apply various effects within the volume. Creative placements allows players within the volume to place blocks they have on them, as if they were in creative mode. Damage multiplier can be used to make all or particular entities within take increased or decreased damage. Fly allows players within the volume to fly as if they were in creative mode. No build prevents the placement of blocks within the volume. Exceptions can be configured. No destroy prevents the destruction of blocks within the volume. Exceptions can be configured, including allowing particular tools to still break blocks. No door open prevents doors from being open within the volume. No harvest prevents you from harvesting crops within the volume. Exceptions can be configured. No heal means health can only decrease within the volume. No block tick causes time to freeze for blocks within the volume, preventing things such as crop or tree growth. A new modify always active rules effect, which can be used to toggle the persistent effects above. A new cancel VFX effect that will cause particles of a chosen type to expire within the volume. A new remove/kill entities effect that can be used to remove unwanted entities of a particular type within the volume. The send signal effect will now include additional information so that other trigger volumes will be able to read exactly what caused the sending of the signal and react accordingly. The on-block broken trigger will now respond to blocks broken by environmental effects such as fire. The teleport effect can now be used to teleport players to an entirely different world. Duplicating a trigger volume will now also copy its volume settings to the new trigger volume. Saving a trigger volume preset now optionally saves the volume settings. They also changed some stuff with the creative tools, added a searchable drop-down to the entity tool panel, allowing you to browse and swap the model of an entity directly from the tool settings. Loading a prefab via the prefab list will now result in a message about using the paste tool to then paste that prefab into the world. Added the water quality options to the advanced rendering settings menu. This affects how the water renders and has no impact on the purity of water. And they remove particle quality options from the advanced rendering settings menu, as it doesn't currently change how particles render. Grass that generates within flat worlds will now have a darker tint. Goats, mouflons, and turkeys now have distinct sounds. The in-game plugin list now has a search bar. Plugins are sorted alphabetically, with third-party plugins listed above built-in ones. Typing in the search bar filters and ranks results by name. Hytale now has gyroscope support for controllers. Those with a gyroscope-capable controller, such as DualSense or Switch Pro, can now enable motion controls in the controller settings to aim the camera by tilting the controller. The movement of other players and NPCs will now be smoother across a wider range of frame rates, and the game automatically will adjust for unstable connections to reduce stuttering. The view distance settings will now display if the server has a maximum view distance configured. Opening the prefab browser will now display the last folder you navigated to and the search query you previously had active. Clicking Assets will reset both. Opening a world to connections will now be more reliable when using Wi-Fi or on computers with VPN software installed. Upon opening a world up for friends to join, if automatic port forwarding isn't available, a message will appear stating that players outside of your local network may be unable to connect. They also fixed a bunch of bugs, such as fixed an issues where area of effect block interactions were unintentionally offset by one block, physic objects were pitching downward and bouncing erratically, physic objects would remain active independently rather than settling to rest, damage hit particles would not appear for all players near combat, dashing with a weapon before mantling would carry the speed boost through the mantle. Teleporter cooldowns would be reset too quickly, resulting in them immediately sending players back. Teleporters could appear inactive if the warp name contained capital letters. Crops would lose custom growth stage upon saving and reloading the world. The night would still be skipped even if a player was awoken from their slumber. Breaking and placing blocks in cubic worlds outside the old range. Fluids not functioning in cubic worlds outside the old range. The biggest change is that now you can create traps, obstacles, and parkour challenges using entities with hard collision. Players can now stand on and be smoothly pushed by entities with hard collision. Modders creating entities such as moving walls or platforms can use this new behavior to ferry around friends or trap trespassers. For more complex obstacles, the entity tool may now be used to give entities rotated collision boxes that players can collide with. At this stage, these changes will only affect collisions with players. Other entities will have to wait to experience these changes. They've added a new cape called the Bastion Cape. This new cape can only be obtained if you enable two-factor authentication for your Hytale account. The trigger tool was again updated to have a new time effect that can be used to set, pause, resume, or smoothly change the time of day over a duration. The effects may be applied to either everyone or just the player that caused the trigger. A no use always effect was also added that can be used to block the usage of blocks or entities within the volume. They also added some other effects such as not equal comparison options for tech conditions, item conditions, and player count conditions, at least, at most, more than and less than comparison options for tag conditions, and now multiple trigger volumes share the same display name. When this occurs, duplicated names are automatically numbered to distinguish them. Trigger volumes now keep their effects lined up correctly when you paste or generate a rotated prefab. Spawn points and other volume effects will now rotate along with the prefab. The palette editor, color, and point building tools now have updated icons. There's also a new transparency algorithm to improve how overlapping transfer. This change currently only impacts Windows and Linux users. First of all, earlier this week, they released pre-release 8 because there was some kind of huge exploit and they wanted to fix it very quickly. And now for pre-release 9. Hardcore mode is finally here. Hardcore mode can only be activated when creating a new world. Once a world has been created, this setting cannot be adjusted. Avatars won't respawn in hardcore mode, but will instead drop all of their worldly possessions and be switched into spectator mode. Spectators won't be visible to others that aren't spectating themselves, nor will they be able to interact with the world they're in. Server ops can also toggle to and from spectator mode with the new /spectate command. They updated the documentation site with a new theme and new domains. Stamina will now begin refilling half a second faster after guarding with a weapon or shield. The first two attacks in the dagger combo now deal slightly more damage. They added a search box to the top of the control page within the settings menu to quickly find keybinds. They also added smooth color blending across biome borders, so terrain and foliage tints now fade gradually between biomes instead of switching abruptly. Their blocks can now be crafted into 2 half slab blocks at the builder's workbench. They of course fixed a lot of bugs and some issues with the trigger volume tool. Players can use the prefab preview command to spawn a ghost of any prefab in the world at their location. Plugins can drop a ghost of any prefab into the world with the new Persistent Prefab Preview API and reveal it from the bottom up, one layer at a time. The place block and replace block type trigger effects can now rotate blocks on all three axes. Yaw, pitch, and roll parameters are supported. Thrown poop no longer deals damage. Great! Solid fluids, such as lava, now appear more opaque instead of blending into the terrain. Stacked fluids, such as water above lava, now blend correctly. Fluids suspended over empty space are now visible. Thin, single-layer fluids are now visible. Dedicated servers now recover on their own when the main world crashes. Before, a crash would leave the server unjoinable and kick everyone until the operator reloaded the world or restarted the process. Haircuts have received a visual pass and had their colors tuned. Ear accessories now line up with each ear type, shifting their positions accordingly. The following cosmetics now have more color options. Alpine Explorer's Jumper, the Crown, and thigh-high stockings. There's also been some visual reworks for the following cosmetics: Alpine's Explorer's Jumper, bulky beanie, cowboy hat, elf hat, floppy beanie, forehead protector, Frostwarden cape, Frostwarden hat, gold trim shirt, headband, horned helmet, king's cape, leather cap, one-piece school dress, and workout cap. There are now 5 different hardcore mode settings you may select from when generating a new world. Off, parkour isn't enabled. Permadeath, each player has a single life, death is permanent. 3 strikes, each player has 3 lives. After strike 3, you're out. 9 lives, everyone in the world has a shared pool of 9 lives. Once the 9th death occurs, the run ends for all. And Soulbound, everyone's fate is interconnected. If any player dies, the run's over. When worlds are being created in 3 strikes or 9 lives mode, the number of lives initially available can be increased or decreased from the default. And no, it cannot be set to 0. When a hardcore mode is enabled, the number of lives remaining will appear above your health. Added a fully leaf soil block. It's like the leafy soil block, but fuller. There's now a search button to the settings menu that searches across all tabs. Transparent surfaces have been improved, particularly when looking through multiple different transparent things at the same time, like glass and water. Discover, install, and manage mods with the new in-game mod browser. The first version of the mod browser is now available from the main menu, showing featured, popular, and recently updated mods. Filter by category or search mod names and descriptions for something specific. Open any mod to see its description, screenshots, download counts, supported game versions, and install buttons. View updates or remove your installed mods from the My Library screen. Builder tools now support larger creations. They now support selections of up to 16 million blocks. Large builds now save in a new compact format, keeping file size small. Copying, cutting, pasting, or saving large selections is now a lot faster. The Ancient Gateway now has a button that can be used to close the active portal. Fortunately, each gateway has a convenient failsafe that will prevent this button from working if someone is still on the other side of the portal. Builder tools, actions, and saves will now show a single notification that updates instead of sending a notification for each update. The world creation screen has been adjusted to include a larger, customized button. The world settings screen that appears when customizing a new world now has a Create World button. The Undo and Redo now use considerably less memory after making several large edits. After an extremely long run of very large edits, you may not be able to undo all the way back to the start. 。 . 。  . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 .
。 . 。 . 。 .
Larger soft blocks, such as the spider cocoon, can now be shut down. Interaction prompts now show all available options for blocks with more than one interaction. The memory used for high view distances has been improved. Worlds with a lot of open sky above them now keep far less lighting data around. They also fixed a bunch of bugs with the combat, movement, and world gen. And these are all of the significant changes for this update. Overall, it's a pretty cool update, but let's be real, the real juice will be coming in Chapter 1. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.